Welcome to the Bipolar Buzz podcast, where we slice stigma surrounding mental illness one episode at a time, and we give others courage to do the same. I am your host, Lay, a wife, mom, daughter, sister, coworker, and friend who also lives with bipolar 1 disorder. So, without further ado, let's slay. My name is Lay, and today's topic is going to be addiction. And this is a topic that I think is very important to talk about. It's one that not a lot of people know about. They have a lot of misconceptions about it. So we'll talk about what addiction is. We'll talk about what it looks like as far as affecting relationships, also what treatment and recovery might look like. And I have the perfect guest to guide us through this conversation today, Miss Janice. Thank you so much for being my guest today. She's a lot of things, but I'm just going to name a few. She's a mom, she's a therapist, an author, a speaker, and she's also someone who's been in recovery from addiction herself for over a decade. So thank you, Janice, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. I'm really glad to be here. I always welcome the opportunity to talk about addiction because I think we need to shed light on the topic and, reduce the guilt and shame that's associated with and mental health in general.
Most definitely. And that's exactly why I wanted to have you on. So let's start by talking about, I think, and you might agree, that there are a lot of misconceptions about addiction, who goes through addiction, what type of person. Like, I think people kind of have this stereotype. It's one kind of person or someone from one kind of place, but that's not really the case. And people don't really know what addiction is. Do you mind explaining what is addiction?
Yeah. Okay. So, and everyone has a little bit of a different, probably, definition. And every time I'm asked this, it probably changes a little bit. But I would say addiction is when the use of a substance or the dependence upon a behavior, because we can get addicted to activities, sex, smoking, a number of different things, not just substances. And but when the compulsion to do so continues, the urges continue past the point, despite the point that there's adverse consequences associated with that. I mean, most of us, let's just take alcohol, start drinking because it offers a little release, relaxation. We're searching for the positive aspects of it, and no judgment there. But the addict or alcoholic will continue to use alcoholic or their drug of choice despite it being a problem. For instance, I don't know why, but I've kind of developed a really high sensitivity to spicy foods. And I used to love spicy Mexican foods and spicy Italian foods. But literally, it burns my mouth now, and I have no problem. I mean, I miss it a little bit. I miss that if I go out for Mexican food with my kids and the cheese dip's a little too spicy for me, kind of miss it. But I don't keep putting my chips in that salsa. You know what I mean?
Right.
So whereas the addict or alcoholic, I mean, will continue to go back despite waking up with hangovers, having, I don't know, problems at home, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, thank you for breaking it down like that, because I think a lot of people, they miss that it's something that you can't really control to a point. It's not something that's totally within your control. And I like your analogy that you use with the spicy food. Like, that's something that you can just easily say, I don't want to do that anymore. But then when it comes to something that you're addicted to, it's a different kind of storyline. When did you realize that you struggled with addiction yourself?
Great question. Well, a little background to my story. So I grew up in an alcoholic home. My dad was what you would call as a functioning alcoholic. I was the youngest of three kids. It wasn't a terrible home life, but it definitely was dysfunctional, and all of the kind of rules of an alcoholic home. You don't talk, You don't tell anyone about what's going on. There's two versions of your family, the public version and the private version, and for kids, it's very confusing. Um, I realized really early on that I wanted to help other, especially adolescents, not experience what I experienced growing up. So I was drawn to social work because of one, the helping profession, two, because I think it was a way of fixing myself of my childhood wounds. And I didn't drink during that time because partially I knew there was alcoholism on both sides of my family. It goes back on my mother's father was your I wouldn't want to say classic alcoholic, but he was much more the stereotypical alcoholic, the man who would go to the bar and not come home, and the kids would have to drag him home, or he wouldn't give money to his family, not the gutter kind, which is an example of how, because I became like the drunk soccer mom kind. We come in all flavors, alcoholics and addicts. We come in all flavors, and you can't always identify us. But I knew from a young kid that I was probably going to be predisposed to drinking, to alcoholism or addiction. And then also growing up in that dysfunctional family, I was super controlling, and that was one of my coping mechanisms. Like I couldn't control my family life, the environment, anything I could control, I wanted to. And so when I drank or experimented with, and I pretty much only experimented with pot as a young person, that had automatically negative consequence. I didn't like the feeling of being out of control. So as a young person, I did drink, but I drank socially and in a very controlled manner. And I did have some other healthier coping skills at that time. I was a really serious athlete, and that kept me busy and kept me out of trouble. So, and then I went into the field of social work, and I started my career in addiction counseling. I was naturally drawn to that. And and because of that, I got involved in my own therapy, because I think being a good therapist or counselor or coach requires you to have done your own work, your own self-help work.
Definitely.
And I got involved with Al-Anon and ACA. So for a long time, I had some pretty good self-help skills and coping mechanisms for dealing with, the day-to-day issues of life. Where I started going wrong was when I let first of all, my ego and my pride say, because I didn't really start drinking regularly until I hit my 40s. And I let my pride say, well, I've drank like a normal person for 20 years. I obviously have missed that, genetic link or the bullet. It's not going to happen to me. So I started drinking after I was done having kids. And because I had 4 kids, and my 30s was pretty much spent balancing work, children, being pregnant, breastfeeding. There wasn't much time for a social life, which fueled fueled took away my self-help skills. I'm jumping in with all kinds of stuff because it's kind of a combination. I hit my 40s, started drinking socially because I was so active and I was trying to be the super mom. I let my self-care skills go. The pride and ego and the I'm smarter than that, the negative side of being a therapist, like I'm too smart for this. I won't let it happen. I'll just drink like a normal person. Fueled that denial, and my drinking gradually increased. I had a couple of really tough events in my 40s, which I think accelerated my drinking. And I can't really say when in my 40s. I know I started drinking about 40, 42, and I went to treatment at 52. So somewhere along that time, because I do believe in the genetic link of alcoholism and addiction. In fact, they've discovered a gene that's associated with alcohol use disorder. I think I triggered the gene that I have. I definitely, there's alcoholism on both sides of my family. Being a therapist, did that help or hurt? Well, initially it really hurted because I had this tremendous guilt and shame. I shouldn't have let this happen. I'm supposed to be smarter than this. So at first, you know what? It was the guilt and shame, and it pushed me away from asking for help. And then it didn't get better at first because then I was like, oh, I know how to fix myself. I'll do all the things I used to do. Like one of my, and I don't know if it's a necessary healthy coping skill, but I was really into fitness and athletics and, you get natural endorphins. So I'm like, I'm going to go back to running. That'll fix me. Well, that didn't fix me. And it wasn't easy to do because I had 4 children and a husband who traveled. So that didn't work unless I got up early in the morning and then you got less sleep at night. That
Hmm.
didn't work. So the drinking I was beginning to realize wasn't working, but I thought, I don't want to give up the alcohol yet. So I decided, well, I'll go back to therapy. Therapy will work. It's worked before. I'm going to get back to therapy. So, of course, being a sneaky alcoholic, I picked a therapist who was wonderful, but didn't know a lot about alcoholism.
Mm.
Um, I don't know if that was intentional or subconscious, but she didn't know a whole lot about alcoholism. And I didn't tell her the whole truth about how much I was drinking, but I did tell her about my anxiety and my sleeplessness. So then we discovered, well, maybe I could benefit from an anti-anxiety or sleeping medication, an antidepressant. So then I tried to fix myself with medications. The point being, as a therapist in denial, I was like, I'm going to try everything else that I can do before I try giving up alcohol. And none of it worked. And honestly, I was able to reduce my drinking, but I learned in a very painful way you cannot combine sleeping medication with alcohol, even a small amount of alcohol because and I didn't even realize it until I got sober that I had been having blackouts and the last
Oh, wow.
like 6 months of my active alcoholism. I found out from my kids and my husband later when they were confronting me about behaviors. I was like, I don't remember that. And they talk about dates and it was really scary.
That's very scary. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, and it's very dangerous. So taking those medications really perpetuated the dysfunctional behavior and the emotional turmoil. I finally went to AA.
So what took you there? Was there a defining moment or was it just a combination of everything that kind of led you to going there?
Yeah, no, it was a big nudge from the therapist who was like, I think, and she was not talking about AA, she was talking about other 12-step programs. And she's, I think you should do that. And I really could no longer blame my busy schedule or my husband not being home because of his busy schedule or the stress. I mean, I had to start looking at myself. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go to AA. And I know what it's about. I've been to open meetings before and I did the research. And this date is really important to me. It's as important as my sobriety date is November 14th, 2012. I walked into my first AA meeting and I didn't walk out of there saying, hi, I'm Janice, I'm an alcoholic.
Uh-huh.
Because I honestly really wanted to go in and have them tell me, oh, no, you're not.
Hmm.
But, and I think I even said that. I mean, it was a small meeting and everyone shared. And I'm like, I'm just here because I need help and I'm concerned about my drinking. But by the end of the meeting, I felt like these people weren't going to judge me. They understood me, they accepted me, and it was free, cheap therapy. I heard a lot of good things from different people, like little things that I connected with, some other self-help skills. So I kept going back. And I went for the next 3 months because I went to treatment on February 14th, 2013, exactly 3 months later. I went to a meeting almost every day. I wasn't successful at staying sober for two big reasons. And one is because I wanted to work the program my way. I didn't fully surrender. I remember it was like 2 weeks in of going, I said, okay, I'm an alcoholic, and I'm willing to admit that. There's no harm in saying that. And that gave me a sense of relief and actually empowerment. But I still wasn't really got a sponsor. I did some of the things you're supposed to do, but I didn't fully invest in the program. And the other thing that I learned later, which I think is a really important issue that we don't talk about, and I haven't ever talked about this on a podcast before. So for me, I don't think I can ever return to drinking again. For me, any mood altering medication could trigger my addictive tendencies. For me, I can't do it. Complete abstinence is not the only way to find freedom from alcohol. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, but for me, it is. And my point is this. During those last 3 months, I was still using a mood altering drugs. I was still using the sleeping medication and the anti-anxiety, which was mood altering. I mean, there's some anti-anxieties that are fine that
Mhm.
addicts and alcoholics can take without worrying about it triggering. And again, here's something that I really believe in the science of addiction and the brain science of it all. And here's what I believe. As long as you are continuing to fuel the addictive tendencies of the brains, it's not going to learn to heal itself. It's not going to learn to adapt to life without the substance. The cravings are not going to go away. The urges are not going to go away. And they never went away those first 3 months. It still took a long time for them to go away. But I had to completely remove all of that out of my system, I think, before I could get clarity, my brain could start to heal, could start to grow. New channels, neurotransmitters can
Mhm.
grow back, all of that. I have a chapter about that in my book that explains it very simply. Um, but I had to get off of it all. And I think for a lot of us that this is a hiccup that a lot of people have when they start in recovery. Like they're willing to give up the hard drugs, but not the alcohol. Or they're willing to give up the alcohol and the hard drugs, but not pot. I had to give it all up. I feel like those last 3 months of active addiction was triggered over and over again by the mood altering medications I was taking.
The piece you said about having to seek therapy yourself, to make you a better therapist, like these are things that I haven't really, considered. And I think it's so important what you said about everybody's journey being different. For
Yeah.
you, abstinence was the way to go, and you had to just completely remove yourself from everything. But for somebody else, that might not be the case. But for you, that's
Mhm.
what you had to do. And I think your level of self awareness and all of the hard work, self work that you did to reach that point, I think was probably very instrumental in getting you to where you are today.
I mean, I agree. I've worked really hard at this and
Yeah.
I made a lot of mistakes, and especially in early recovery where I put too much time and energy into my recovery and I was off balance. I didn't put as much time into, for instance, working with my family and reintegrating, understanding and respecting the damage I'd done with the relationships with my children and now ex-husband, and also my parents and my siblings.
Yeah, I
So
wanted to ask you about your relationships with family. And you can talk about when you were a child growing up in a home with someone who was an alcoholic, or you can talk about you being an alcoholic yourself and how that affected your relationship with your kids or with who was your husband. How how did this affect you, and how do you go about repairing those relationships after you've damaged them?
yeah, yeah. Great question, because I'm very passionate about the point that this is a family disease. It's not just a me problem. I drug my kids and my husband and my siblings, even, and my parents, even though they didn't live near me, they were all impacted
Mm,
because and I tend to isolate and become more of an introvert when I'm anxious, nervous, afraid. And when I was drinking, I isolated more and more. So I wasn't as available to my kids. The family I grew up in, which is crazy. I mean, they weren't crazy. The point that's crazy is that I grew up in this family. I'm like, I'm determined to raise my kids differently. And I
Hmm.
did to a certain degree. And thankfully for my two older kids, I mean, they were like 10 or 12 years old before I started drinking. So they had kind of a more normal mother. I mean, I'm not saying I was always normal. I've always been quirky, had my
Nothing wrong with that.
idiosyncrasies. Yes. I have my compulsiveness, but anyhow. So the family I grew up in had its own set of rules, and I worked real hard to break those rules. Those rules were don't talk, don't tell, respect authority above all, don't question authority. Your teacher, your principal, your parent is always right. Don't express your feelings. You're not allowed to have feelings unless it's a good one. You can be happy, you can be
Of
joyful,
course.
but don't cry, don't be angry. And so I strove as a young mom and even during my active addiction to break through some of those patterns. But the sad part for me, which also fueled my um, inability to repair the relationships with my kids and my ex initially, was the fact that there were deeper childhood wounds, like feeling less than, being afraid of abandonment, terrified of rejection, um, kind of the deeper wounds that I've addressed on a certain level, but not on a deeper level. And so when I was vulnerable, when I was in early recovery, well, in active addiction, I was not a great mom. Let's go back to that. So in an active addiction, I yeah, I relied on the older kids to take care of the younger kids. I isolated in my room. I was hot-tempered. I would say I was emotionally abusive, never physically abusive. Uh, I regret all of that. And I think the only way to heal that, which is part of the repairing part, is to be honest about it.
Mm,
And and my saying, I emotionally abused my children, hopefully that will help some other parent be like, okay, maybe I did too, and maybe I need to look at that.
yeah.
So, and that was a tough thing to look at. And my initial reaction in early recovery was to avoid it, which is a childhood trait that I had to avoid, procrastinate. So, I guess what I'm saying is all those like dysfunctional, deeper childhood traits still impacted my relationships with my kids in early recovery. And I focus on my kids a lot, but this is applies to all relationships.
Sure.
My marriage was not saved. We did not survive my addiction, and out of respect for my now ex-husband, that's pretty much all I'll say. I take responsibility for that, primary responsibility. You can only push a person so far. Um, and that's a demonstration that not every relationship is going to heal.
Hmm.
But I made a lot of mistakes in early recovery that were generated, and I didn't acknowledge it until I was like 6, 7 months sober, that some of the problems I was having at that point were still residual problems from my childhood. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. Yes, it does.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I teach and tell people is that, at some point in your recovery, you got to go back and heal, do that inner child work, because it's going to follow you. It's going to impact your future relationships. And thankfully, there's a lot of information about that on the internet. So just like with the drinking, I had to get miserable and really see the damage I'd done before I was really willing to change it. I mean, that's a common saying that people don't typically change until the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of changing.
Hmm.
And that was true for me with my relationships with my kids. And when I was about 6 months sober, I encountered a loss, which I've shared before, so I won't go into now. But it was a wake up moment, and I realized I went from treatment to a halfway house. as opposed to returning home, which perpetuated that distance between me and my family and my kids. Because like I said, I threw myself into recovery, over the top, threw myself into it, which is a mistake a lot of us make. So when I woke up and saw that my relationship with my kids had not improved in the 6 months I've been sober, it was shocker. And it was heartbreaking because, well, for one, okay, this is a deep topic. Growing up in a dysfunctional family like I did, I was the youngest, the people pleaser, the mascot. I don't think I never had anyone encourage me to nurture my own identity.
Mm.
So as a young person, my identity was athlete, and then it was social worker, and then it was mom. And here I was at 52, and I certainly wasn't an athlete anymore. I couldn't be a social worker right then. I'm in early recovery. And my kids don't want to have anything to do with me. I had no identity,
Wow.
and it was
Wow.
another bottom. It was a terrible, terrible bottom, but it's what took me to start making changes. So what worked after all of that was the deeper part of the work was I had to do my own internal work. I had to face things that I had not want to face. This is what I recommend for anyone in early recovery if you want to repair relationships. You've got to take responsibility for your behavior, your actions, and addictions. You can't blame, diminish, make excuses for, because that just looks like more alcoholic addict behavior.
Mm.
So you got to take responsibility. You have to create a plan for recovery. And this is for recovery from anything, whether it's sex addiction, gambling, alcohol, or cocaine. Have a plan, have a recovery plan, because that's probably one of the number one things that will help your families build trust back in you. If you say to them, I mean, I had my kids a number of times say, just promise us you'll never drink again. Or, and you learn, at least through the AA program, that you don't make promises like that.
Mm.
Instead, you say, I'll tell you what, I stayed sober today. I had a plan for today. I'm going to use the same plan, these same activities tomorrow. So I'm pretty confident about tomorrow. And I'm going to repeat this over and over and over again. But for
So
other,
is the recovery plan, is that something you would share with loved ones
yeah,
then?
yeah.
Okay, so everybody's kind of involved in it.
Yeah, and they may or may not want to be involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
My kids, and my ex-husband was good. He got the kids into therapy,
Okay.
but he didn't, and no disrespect, he didn't get them into Al-Anon or support groups with other kids. So one of the things they talk about now is that they still felt very isolated and ashamed during that time period. They still felt like they had no one to talk to, that no one really understood them. So that's an important aspect of helping your family members. What an addict or alcoholic can do for their family members is get them involved in their own support groups. But back to the alcoholic or addict, you got a plan, you take responsibility, you become an excellent communicator and listener. Your kids, your husband, spouse, partner may not want to talk to you, but you take the risk and make yourself available. And
Mm-hmm.
when they do share, and this was hard for me because I wanted to explain and make excuses for why I was drunk and embarrassing on December 23rd. You know what I mean? I wanted to say, well, it was
Mm-hmm.
because I wasn't ready for they don't want to hear that. They don't want to know
Right.
that. Instead, what they want is for them to be able to tell you how terrible it was for them, and for you to listen and to validate and begin to make the effort to understand. They want to be heard. Kids, loved ones, partners. I mean, I think the best thing we do in relationships is to be quiet and be a great listener and to
And that's
learn.
hard to do, even if you're not struggling with addiction. It's hard to do those things, to listen when you're wrong and to hear other people's point of view. And like you said, to validate those emotions, even if
Mhm.
you didn't intend to make them feel a certain way, you did. And that's something that you've got to own up to, like you said.
Right. And then there's the other side of that too, is that there's people who are like, I want to fix you. You're telling me your problems, you're sad. Well, I'm going to fix you, and that's not what always the other person needs to. Or cornerstone, I think that we have to do as the addict or alcoholic is that we have to have balance in our own recovery plan. I think the biggest well, one of the biggest mistakes I made, which was investing too much time in my recovery plan and not enough time in bringing in outside support systems like my family, like my parents, like my siblings, and involving them in my recovery program. So balance is important. I preach that, and just in general, I think it's important to have a good balance of like a spiritual investment in your spiritual health, physical health, psychological, social health, that's important, and emotional health. So I think that's an important aspect of it too. And although this is going to sound like I'm contradicting myself,
Mhm.
community is important because recovery is tough. And we have to have people who understand us, who know us. And one of the biggest things that helped me in repairing the relationships with my family was not the book, the social work education, though it's valuable.
Yeah.
It was interacting with my peers and my peers' kids and asking them and talking to them and saying, what's working, what's not working. Give me hope. I mean, there was a time when I really lost all hope and I thought, I'll never repair the relationships with my family members. But I would talk to people who'd been in the program a lot longer and be like, well, if they can do it, I can do it too. So,
Yeah, it's good to have that support and people
yeah,
around you who are kind of, for lack of a better word, ahead of you in their recovery that you can look up to and say, I can get there too. That's very important.
absolutely. Yes, yes. And I think that's true. I mean, we all need mentors.
Yes.
So, and there's probably things that I missed, and it's going to change from person to person too. I mean, I reflect on my experience. I had friends whose family members were joyous and on pink clouds when they came home, and everything was great for a
Oh,
while. And and people who had ups and downs, it's going to be a wave. Probably another good thing is not to make any expectations,
hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
take it as they go, be flexible, which
So
is
how do you, because you said that because of your addiction, a lot of relationships, of course, were damaged and you hurt people, they were broken. How do you forgive and love yourself? Like,
Mm,
what does a relationship with yourself look like while you're going through recovery and trying to repair these relationships with your family and your friends?
that's a great question. And again, that was hard for me. It was hard for me because as a kid, I learned to serve other people, to put
Mhm.
other people's needs first, to be the cute, the mascot, etc. So it wasn't comfortable for me to forgive myself, to give myself a little compassion, always put myself last. But you learn that in order to have that balanced recovery, in order to get where you want to be, you have to offer that forgiveness to yourself. I mean, you're hurting the people around you too if you don't begin to forgive yourself. They're not going to forgive you if you can't forgive yourself. Um, and that's really an important role as a parent, just in raising your kids, is to show your kids that you're human. You make mistakes. You
Yeah.
have good days, bad days, and you can pull back from it. It did take me, and it still takes me. I mean, I still participate in a women's support group, therapy group twice a month. We're all from dysfunctional families. We're not all alcoholics or addicts, but we have that common bond. And we delve into all kinds of issues, and almost 90% of the time when we're digging up a new topic or issue, when we talk about, my therapist is great. She'll be like, okay, we're going to explore this issue so you can examine how you were impacted by this behavior. And initially my brain will go to, like, let's say this is totally random. Let's say my parents, I don't want to say abandoned, but let's say my mother went into psychiatric care when I was age 3 and didn't come back until I was 5.
Okay.
So we would be discussing the impact that that might have, that physical abandonment. And in my head, instead of going, oh, I suffered this and this is how I felt, in my head, I would go, oh, I did the same thing to my kids. And I had a hard time switching from, because I wanted to fix them first. I wanted to fix that but I couldn't do that until I fixed the part within me. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
My tendency was still to want to apply what I was learning to healing them as opposed to healing myself. And what I came to realize, you have to do both, which is another great piece of reassurance for
Hmm.
any parent who's listening out there. You don't have to be perfect parents. There's some great TV commercials about this. Much better to be human, to grow with your children, and lead by example. So we don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be perfect to become a parent. There's nothing wrong with 19-year-old mom versus a 38-year-old mom. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
You both have the opportunity to grow and mature with your kids.
You are such an open book, and you talk about things, and I know you've been in recovery for a while, but it's just like you have kind of separated yourself from who you were, and maybe that's part of that forgiveness and loving yourself, and maybe
Mhm.
that's part of the reason why you can talk about it so openly. But
Mhm.
because of all the, the stigma and the shame that's associated with addiction, and really just, yeah, addiction in general, what empowers you to talk and open up about your experience?
Oh, you just got chill bumps. I love this topic. And the short version of this is that people die. If you don't talk about
Mm,
it,
wow,
people die.
that's powerful.
It's sad and maybe it's not politically correct, but it's the truth. And I'll share this and then I'll get philosophical. My the two women who I was closest to in treatment both died from this disease within 6 months of us leaving treatment.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And then I would say, so I was thinking like, oh, that sounds terrible because I really believe that recovery is possible and that it does work, programs work. So I was like, okay, I got to expand upon that because I can't say this and just leave people hanging. So I think back to the 5 most important women that I went to treatment with, and 2 of them passed away
Mm,
within 6 months. Another died within about 2 years.
wow.
One who went to treatment and you would have thought, no chance that she'll get sober, did it and is amazing. Sadly, she died of COVID in 2020.
Oh,
But
I'm
she had,
sorry.
from 2013 to 2020, um, a great life and rebuilt relationships with her kids. Actually, she and her boys were instrumental in helping me and giving me hope that I could repair the relationships. Because she was one of the ones whose 2 sons welcomed her home.
That's
Her family
awesome.
was very non-judgmental. They accepted her. They wanted to do, whereas my family was like, oh God, can't tell anyone.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but the stigma, here's the problem. So, and then to expand upon that, um, I started out in a 28-day program. I ended up staying in a longer program because I had a lot of those childhood issues and some experiences of child sexual abuse and adult sexual assault that I had diminished the power of until I got sober.
Wow.
So those things kept me into treatment a little bit longer. And here's the happy point. Okay. So most of the women that I went to treatment with, and there were at our facility, two cabins of about, on the average, 20 women. Most of them were professionals who were there because they were doctors, lawyers, in the military, nurses. They were trying to maintain their professional licenses, or they were like me, a mom who just needed a lot of help. And of those women who committed to the accountability of their professional licenses and the programs, which I'm telling you, they did not make it easy for anyone who's listening and worried and has heard about the rampant use of drugs and alcohol among physicians. I want you to know once a physician or a nurse goes to treatment and they're identified, that licensing board is on top of them. And
Mm.
they are probably going to become the best physician and the best caregiver ever.
Mm.
But I would say, and it wasn't that I picked bad friends, but most of those women are successful today. I would say of the people that I've maintained contact with, of those, and I haven't maintained with all 40 of them, but let's say 20 of them, um, all but, my three friends who died are sober because of accountability, because they worked the program, because they surrendered and asked for help. Now, taking this back to your question about stigma, we
Mhm.
were all forced to do that. My big motivation, my accountability was my kids and my family. So, point here, because a lot of people say you can't get sober until you really want it. Well, I went to treatment because I was losing my kids.
Yeah.
And I stayed working at my program and I stayed sober because I knew my ex-husband would take my kids away from me. That was my big accountability. So as long as you have some kind of accountability, I think that is a huge tool to long-term avoiding relapse, maintaining or getting back to recovery. If you work a program, it works. Here's the thing with stigma. 30 years ago when I started my career, I mean, you think about the movie like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Mental health, everything was given a bad name. I mean, oh my God, that person's crazy.
Mhm.
Alcoholic, you would think of alcoholic as the Skid Row alcoholic, the person that's stumbling,
Right.
and throws up at the birthday party or whatever. Um, we've come a long way with reducing stigma. I am really active. I hate to say that. I'm pretty active on Instagram. That's my only real social media. And I've seen, and I don't know if it's just me because most of my connections are people in the recovery field or mental health field or inspiration, motivation, but I feel like there is a change in reducing the stigma. And I think that is really, really important because we need to be able to act. And this is the big reason why I tell my story. So I want to give hope. I want to take away the guilt and shame. That was the thing that kept me from treatment. I was sick for like an extra 2 years trying to do all those crazy things, making myself and my kids miserable because of the stigma, because I was afraid to ask for help. I didn't want anyone to know. And my kids stayed hurt and my ex-husband stayed hurt for a long time because they were afraid to tell anyone that their wife, their mom, their sister, their daughter had an alcohol problem. So they kept isolated. They didn't get that community support or that love that helps heal. We don't
Yeah.
heal in isolation. It's really important we share our stories so we give hope to other people. And you can tell I'm passionate about this.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
and I personally believe that I mean, this is one great thing about Obamacare. Obamacare opened up more treatment, mental health treatment, addiction and alcohol treatment than any other time in our medical history.
Hmm.
So we need to have a more open attitude. We need to accept that mental health is as important as physical health.
Very true.
And I've seen that too. I have to, I'm older. I have to go. I'm on blood pressure medication, so I'm forced to see my doctor, my family doctor every year. And I don't know when they started this, but it's sometime in the last 5 years. Now, everyone that they come in gets this little like mental health questionnaire, which
Oh,
asks
that's
you your
great.
level of depression and all of that. And I'm brutally honest on it. So a lot of times I'm like, okay, it's been a really bad week. That's why I said, I haven't that I'm sleepless for more than 3 nights this week. But I
Hmm.
mean, just that little thing that with physicians are more in tune and aware of, because I mean, they're one of the first opportunities to get us some help.
Exactly. That's a
I mean,
great thing.
it's an education for everyone. We just have to make mental health more acceptable, more of a priority. Mental illness as acceptable. I mean, I really, again, most mental illness is chemical brain related, and I can't speak with that on any kind of authority, but everything I read or learn, demonstrates it's chemical imbalance. It's
Hmm.
not something I choose. I didn't choose to be an alcoholic. The individual who struggles with bipolar 1 doesn't choose that. We have an illness, just like diabetes, high blood
Yeah.
pressure, that has to be treated, and we have to learn to live with it. And we have to be, I gave this example the other day about my mother was a diabetic later in life. She was not always great about sticking to her diet, which would frustrate me. I would get mad at her sometimes for the behavior,
Hmm.
but I never got mad at her for being a diabetic. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
So, and that's a lesson that other people can hear about, like family members, how to deal with us, how to help them on the other side of this is educate yourself, learn that your loved one has a disease. If you can separate the dysfunctional behavior from the disease and still find the person in there,
Oh,
that goes
yeah.
a long way in healing that
Yeah.
relationship. But a key thing about for family members need to have their own support too, and do their own
Hmm.
education. And we as alcoholics and addicts have to support that. And okay, speaking of stigma, many people believe that alcoholic and addict are stigmatizing words. And
Yes.
I agree. I'm just so programmed to use it. And I'm so proud. I mean, I hate to say this. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm proud that I've beaten this disease. You know what I
And you
mean?
should be. Yeah.
Yeah. But I understand for many people, it's more comfortable to say they suffer from a substance use disorder or alcohol use disorder. So for
Hmm.
anyone who's listening, I apologize if I've offended you. And I'm working on it. I promise I'm working on it. I even tried to write a blog about it and I stumbled. I thought, I'm not good enough about this to advocate for it. I'm passionate about it. I really wish more people would reach out before they're miserable because, again, you don't have to be, full-blown alcoholic or have a substance use disorder before you choose to get help for your drinking or drug use. Because
Right.
I also believe that there's kind of a scale, and many people can quit before they become the addict or the alcoholic. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like you can arrest that before you trigger that gene or that dependency or the compulsion.
I feel like there's
Um,
got to be a level of awareness in order for you to do that, like for you to be able to identify, okay, maybe I'm going down the wrong path here and be able to stop it before it gets a little bit too far.
mhm, mhm. And there's some great role models. Hadley Sorensen has written written a great book, The Dirty Truth About Social Drinking. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right,
Mhm.
because she's one of those people who decided to quit drinking before it got any worse. You know what I mean? And I think
Yeah.
there's a nice big trend about going alcohol free too. And I really support that.
But like you said, there's so much power in support and in knowledge and in our voices. The
Mhm.
last thing that I was hoping that you could talk about a little bit, I haven't read your book, but I would
Mhm.
love to know what your book is called and just a little bit about what you write in it. And I would love for you to just kind of promote that on here as well.
My Instagram handle is parenting underscore in underscore recovery. And I am very much an advocate of healthy parenting. But rebuilding relationships and recovery is not just about parenting. It's not just about the mother-child or the father-child relationship. I'll show you a
Hmm.
picture of the book. I don't know if it'll come up backwards, but it's called Rebuilding Relationships and Recovery. How to connect with family and close friends after active alcoholism and addiction. And basically, I wrote the book that I wish had been available for me when I started treatment.
That's awesome.
It's a combination of my social work experience and my personal experience. And boy, I did a lot of research for the book and in talking to my family and friends. It's not my story, but I share a lot of my story in it because it makes it more entertaining and it's more real. But it has a little bit of the, you know, what surrender is, what the 12 steps are. It's not an AA oriented book, but it does have that flavor to it because it's the background of my recovery.
Right.
But it's not just for 12 steppers. And it's not just for parents. It can be for spouses, partners. It can be for the family members. I mean, I've had a lot of family members get this book and find value in it and understand a little bit more about what the addict or alcoholic's going through. It has a little bit of a tough love approach because I really push the issue that you have to be there for your fans and family members. And
Hmm.
and I also have a chapter on the science of addiction because I think it's really important to understand, and this is really important for family members too. Addiction is a brain disease. You do brain damage, when you drink or use drugs or engage in addictive behavior repetitively. You definitely damage your brain. Try to put that as simply as possible.
Hmm.
It needs time to heal. The most common time for relapse is in that first 6 to 12 months of recovery because your brain needs up to 2 years to heal. Essentially, when you use alcohol or drugs, your brain wants to maintain its own balance. So when you use, let's say you use cocaine, an upper, and you get that exhilarating high, well, your brain's natural instinct, if that's the right way to say it, is to then shut down the body's natural dopamine, endorphin making um, hormones. So your brain's trying to balance itself out. The more you use that drug, the less your body is able to develop those hormones and those chemicals. And in actuality, we actually damage our neurotransmitters, which provides
Interesting.
information. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the good news is that it repairs, but it takes time.
Right.
So the point being, early recovery, we're really susceptible to relapse. Two sides of that, three sides of that. Family members need to know that. And I'm not saying excuse someone's relapse, but we have to be a little more compassionate if someone relapses. It's
Hmm.
so easy. From an addict's point of view, we have to know the best, in my opinion, the best defense to that is having that good plan,
Yeah.
practicing the plan, keeping busy, working on that plan because life's going to happen, triggers happen, and it's nice to know you've got, when shit hits the fan, you've got a way to deal with it other than alcohol because your body's still going to go, what worked before
Hmm.
was to go to the bars.
Right.
So your brain is still going to trigger you to do that, even though You're developing, you're beginning to understand that that's not the thing to do, but that primitive part of your brain still wants a quick fix. And the frontal lobe of your brain is still healing and hasn't developed enough strength to go, whoa, Jackie, no, we're not going to.
It's been great. Thank you so much again for your experience, sharing your experience, and for commenting on all of this. I think this has been very eye-opening for me and probably for our listeners as well. So thank you so much.
Well, and thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. I'm Lay, and that's the Buzz. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bipolar Buzz podcast, where we have the courage to slay stigma. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe for more and share with a friend.